listening to the Top Music Guitar Podcast, the show for guitar teachers to learn about the craft of teaching great guitar lessons that students love. If you're looking to start or expand your studio and make guitar teaching your full-time dream job, you've come to the right place. Each week, you'll get to hear from some of the top guitar teachers from around the globe and get their best tips and experiences so you too can build your own dream studio. I'm your host, Michael, and I've founded one of the top guitar schools in Australia, written a best-selling curriculum, and I mentor guitar teachers. I'm excited to share my expertise with you and the wisdom of all the experts we interview. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. Let's get into it. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Top Music Guitar Teaching Podcast. Today, we're going to go in a slightly different direction because, of course, you guys are all guitar players and we don't just want to tap into teaching all the time. We want to explore success in every avenue of guitar playing. And my guest today is a fellow Aussie, someone who took the plunge, moved overseas to the big land, the United States of America, and has been doing very, very well for himself with fingers in a couple of different pies and a huge expertise and knowledge base across a couple of different fields. So let's welcome Michael Flanders to the podcast. Michael, it's great to have you on.
Hello. Good morning, Mike. How you doing?
Very well. So yeah, it's very early here in Melbourne, Australia.
You're the early bird, my friend.
Definitely. And I suppose we had a meeting about a month ago where we were just catching up randomly and chatting about a few things. And I didn't expect to hear an Aussie accent on the other end of the dial. So,
No.
or someone asked me that I'm up early. So yeah, it was a very interesting experience.
My kids sound like Americans. I don't.
And I do apologize, guys. Silly old me locked myself out of the studio. And because it's so early, I didn't want to wake everyone up by rummaging through the house and leading a search raid for them. So I'm coming to you live from the living room. Hopefully the dog won't have a dream on the couch next to me and get some background noise. But
that's all right. I got one lying at my feet as well. So.
It's universal. But guys, apologies in advance for the audio on this one. There might be a little bit extra noise, a few birds singing as they wake up this morning, but hopefully the content will be just as good. So Michael, can you give the listeners a brief overview of what you're doing, your story so far, how you got started in Australia and right up to what you're doing these days?
You want me to go right back to the beginning, or
yeah? So obviously,
where the guitar thing started, or
well, as far as I know, somewhere in the 80s you started as a songwriter. But if you want to go right back to how you got started with guitar or music in general, we'd love to start at the very beginning.
Well, it's kind of easy because my father was a guitar player, so I got a guitar at the very early age of 9, a little half-size K-Pock. Horrible little thing probably, but it worked. And my dad had like probably a pre-war steel guitar. You'd call them a steel guitar back then, where they were just an acoustic that you played with a very simple slide. So that's kind of was my entry to the whole thing. And he was a country guy. So hence, I circled back to country many years later, which is another story. But so obviously the bug hit me then. It really didn't kind of hit me properly till around the age of 15. And Mum bought a brand new, back then, a 3-in-1 record player, the cassette and turntable. So I started, trading records and buying records. And I kind of realized around the age of 15, 16 that I loved the sound of acoustic guitar. A lot of kids my age were diving into, Deep Purple had come out then, with Smoke on the Water, all that stuff. It actually didn't do it for me at all. It was kind of weird. I kind of constantly radiated towards the sound of an acoustic. So I then got hip to Dylan and Neil Young and all those, but I did love Springsteen. I loved it when I heard Born to Run come out, So that kind of was the start of it. My cousin had moved into our home and he had another enormous record collection. So I got exposed to a lot of very cool stuff at a very young age. He brought Joni Mitchell into the house, Richie Havens, Bert Jansch, Stefan Grossman, like fingerstyle acoustic guys. So that's kind of what really grabbed me. And by the time I was that age, I had traded my surfboard for a really good acoustic guitar. And I don't have it anymore, that one. That was kind of the real start for me. And fast forward, I probably started playing acoustic duo stuff at around the age of 18. And in Australia, probably 18 might have been 1980 for me. So there was a lot of gigs. Back then they were paying more money than they are now. It was kind of ridiculous. But so I like most kids, I got into the live thing. But I got my second instrument was banjo, and that was probably the first real changer for me. That literally changed my existence, because I got a phone call. I was working a job at Telecom around that period, and one of the ladies that I was working with, her husband he was an electrical engineer, and he built a studio, and he called me for a banjo session. And I actually asked him, because I knew better banjo players than me, and I said, why me? And he said, well, your timing's really good. I prefer the tone of the banjo in someone in time than a better player that's out of time. So banjo players, because it's so fast, they normally push the meter, So that was my introduction into the studio. And it probably around that period, I had got very hip to Ry Cooder. I don't know if you know who that is, but Ry Cooder's, probably one of the greatest slide guitar players, ever to walk the earth. And luckily enough, I got to hang with him at one point. But he turned my head around completely, the tone and the tunings. And so that was really my biggest entry into the studio world, because I won't say I mastered it at that age, but again, my tuning was pretty good. And I ended up getting to play, by the time I was in my early 20s, I got to play on Ford ads and Coke ads and lots of cool stuff. And I got several producers in Queensland. I was one of their go-to guitar players. So I, keep in mind at a young age, being in that environment, I went to and did some study at the conservatorium up there, and I started to really understand my theoretical side. And that obviously helped, because I got thrown into some very deep waters at different points. I ended up working on a session for a producer by the name of Alan Beard, which he's still around in Queensland. I actually did a gig with him when I was back there, and he was married to Kim Durant, which you may or may not remember her. She was kind of a semi-mid-level artist, but fairly well known in that area. And I was on a session with Tommy Tico as a conductor, and they rolled out the dancing ants, and it was like 8 pages long. And I was certainly lucky that I had learnt enough to navigate something so scary. And my heart was, like, what the hell, and trying to read that massive chart. It's not like coming to Nashville and, I don't have one handy, but looking at a 1-page number chart, which, taking that theoretical knowledge and then coming here and then getting thrown a number chart was another story all within itself. But so that was kind of, a big thing for me. And I got so into that studio world that I built my own studio in my early 20s. I bought a home in the south side of town and built a 20 by 20 concrete block in the backyard. It's still there today, believe it or not. And bought a bunch of gear, bought a bunch of air conditioners, and away I went. So, and I've really never I kind of learned from the school of hard knocks when it came to recording. I've never really taken any real audio lessons. I just, bought Pro Tools and bought this and had a 24-track machine in a Neve at one point. First console was a Fostex console, horrible thing. And an 8-track, a 38, I think it was, 8-track machine and a 2-track machine. And one compressor, one effects unit, and I was away, So that's where I started. And if you walk in that room over here now, you'll have a shock, because there's gear coming off the rafters. So
That's awesome. So this is all while you're still in Queensland, Australia, right?
Yeah, I didn't
Early
leave.
days.
I didn't leave Australia till 2007. I came here in '92 to get a taste of it. It was a very different Nashville in '92. Then I came about 4 or 5 times a year from 2000 right up to the time I moved. I used to do a lot of work over here. I worked closely with the major record companies in Australia, and I'd bring over projects and cut them in Austin or Nashville. And it was a guy that approached me about coming over here back in 2006. And it was kind of, believe it or not, when he first brought this up, I actually didn't take to the idea at first because I had such an incredible good existence in Queensland. I mean, I was the go-to guy. I was making heaps of money. I was doing whatever I wanted. And navigating new turbulent waters really wasn't my idea of a good time at that point. But it certainly has proved a way better existence than being there.
Yeah, very, very exciting. And I definitely want to dive into the next exciting chapter of the story. But you mentioned becoming the go-to guy in the area. So how did you become the go-to guy in the Queensland music scene and the session work that you were doing?
Well, the session work was one thing. I think I've always wanted to, I just love recording, the go-to guy was kind of simple. Around that period when I started cutting country records, probably 99 or 2000. Before that, I was just cutting whatever, rock, pop, but it didn't matter what it was. But the more and more I did it, the more and more I realized that the way I kind of played was more country, folky, Americana kind of stylistically. Being a slide guitar player, that whole kind of fabric works with that. So I think that my wife was a pop artist in the late 90s, and we had a deal through BMG, and that was very pop. And I kind of felt that it really wasn't my thing, and it became not her thing. And I kind of changed that chapter by then saying, I'm just going to go and do my thing, And she's a great writer, my wife. And she kind of felt that she was being pushed in a direction that really didn't suit her as well. She was more like a Melissa Etheridge thing, and they were kind of putting her out more like a pure pop artist. And unfortunately and unfortunately, the dance mix on one of her singles went #1, which really, there's no coming back from a #1 and saying I don't want to do something, So there was a lot of very unusual kind of tensions, I suppose, around that very late 90s for us. We had already had one son, which is now 28 years old, so he was like 2 or something. And we wanted to have more kids, and being a pop artist, it's not really a done thing. If you're in a country artist, you can do whatever. They accept it. It's much more acceptable in the country music world. But anyway, that wasn't the reason, of course, but I just felt that I should be doing projects that I felt more comfortable doing. So first big record I worked on was a guy called Michael Bryars, and we did a record called Somewhere in Between because it was somewhere in between rock and country. And coming from where I came from, I kept heating up the amplifiers, and that's not what they were doing in country. So I was kind of making aggressive kind of tones, and I think that's part of the reason it became popular. People were like, I kind of like what that guy's doing. And because of my father's background and my early existence in country, I knew everybody. So I could tap into the engineer buddy that I was working with. Like, where do you know these people from? I said, my past life, And that's kind of what happened. And I think when you make quality projects, it saved the Queenslanders or the people that were, even in the West, or they could come to me opposed to going to Sydney. It was a lot cheaper for them, and I think it was less intimidating for them. So I made 54 released records in 5 years before I moved to America. It was a lot of work.
That is a big number, considering most people wouldn't touch that in a lifetime. So to do that in a 5-year period.
We were popular. We were going good. So and back then I owned a Neve console and a 24-track machine, and I chained 3-day ADAT machines to it in sync, and it was crazy. But I learned a lot, had a lot of fun, And during those periods, I was a Warner Chappell songwriter and then became an ABC music publishing songwriter by the time I'd moved here. And then I had bought myself out of that deal to work here and do whatever I wished to.
Wonderful. That's really curious, because I think a lot of people are oblivious to how the music industry actually works in terms of the publishing and the songwriting credits and contracts.
No. Yeah. Well, I mean, I consult for two major publishers every month here, and you'd be surprised what people don't know. It's kind of sad considering we have this extremely unregulated business, but and I think you can kind of hit on some good points for what you're doing, because, we grow up in a fantasy world. We grow up watching TV thinking, well, I can be Steve Vai, or I can be Eric Johnson, or, as I said earlier, I was at Dan Dugmore's house earlier today. Now, it's an iconic American musicians. So I think we have fantasies about who they are, how much money they make, how they live. And that's the big problem, is we grab an instrument and we think that is the vehicle for success or for financial freedom, but it's not. It's far from it. And it's being able to understand how the mechanics work can then make things more available. I mean, I got this young girl in Australia, her name's Lily Grace. Now, she's doing awfully well. She just opened for Vance Joy last night in Brisbane. Thousands of people, 9,000 sold-out show. Now, that kid is just really tenacious, She'll ask 1,000 questions and she'll figure it out. She knows more than half the high-level music guys I know, because she's driven for success. She was over here. We booked like 40 songwrites for her, and she's a good little guitar player already. She's figuring that out. She played the Bluebird while she was here. She had played a couple of big festivals with the Davison brothers. So, it's one of those things, it's just a matter of, where do you want to be? How do you figure, and where do you think you fit in, And you can look at the social media aspects of life now and use them as a partial vehicle, but it all comes back to your own personal ability. I mean, as you are doing, I was teaching a bunch of kids when I was very young, and the hardest thing is, it's like when I was in Australia, I was also lecturing at that JMC Academy. Where do those kids go? Where do they end up? How did I end up here? And it's more than, I think quality control has to meet opportunity, but opportunity only happens if you've got a personality that can go, hi, I'm Mike. Or they hear a product and go, I want to work with that guy because the products are successful. Lily Grace is, in the millions of streams. How do you get 1 million streams? My son, Ben, I know you mentioned that in a question, is signed to Candy Rat Records with, if you look at Andy McKee, that amazing acoustic guy. So that label was formed for acoustic soloists. But my son was the second electric soloist that was signed to that label. And how that is working very different than a normal record company works. They sell notation and all kinds of stuff, which, I helped Ben with his contracts when he was getting signed to that label. So the world is very shifting, as we know. It's not like, what I learned, a high-level music executive said to me only a couple of years ago, let's forget what we learned the last 30 years. It's now we've got to move forward. We have to now understand how it's working going forward now, because it's very different.
That's it. And you touched on so many important points, and something I say to my students, and not that I work with people generally as high up the talent roster as you would on a daily basis, but I always say you need to be good as a bare minimum. It's everything you do beyond that separates the good from the great, and the people that get the opportunities from those that miss out every single time. And the haves and the have-nots. It's not enough just to be good anymore. You've got to be exceptional at your instrument. You've got to be organized. You've got to be tenacious, as you mentioned before, in pursuing opportunities. And you have to keep on putting yourself out there, because if you don't, someone else will. The person who is more organized, more driven, more motivated will eat up your spot every single time.
There's two elements of surprise. My youngest son wanted to be a recording bass player. And being in this town, wonderful opportunity for bass players. First thing I showed him was not how to play the bass. Was I opened Pro Tools and showed him how a real session bass player, what their velocity level looked like. What did he?
Write that one down, guys. That's
yeah. Well, what that showed him was, I had a very famous band bass player play a session for me one day, and I won't mention who he is because you would know who he is, and it was a very famous band. His velocity levels were terrible. I couldn't use the track. I wanted to try him out because of who he was, and I showed that to Caleb. Then I showed him what a Nashville session bass player velocities look like. So this guy was, peaks and troughs. This guy was solid. It's like when a snare drum gets hit by a great Nashville drummer or a great drummer full stop, that spike looks like that. But every one of them look like that. And that's how it's got to be. You don't have hard, soft when that's the snare. So you see things you see here I never saw at home. Even though I made a lot of music, there's very few people at this level. And it's not that Aussies can't be at this level. It's just they don't have the day-to-day opportunity to do it. Here, sessions every hour, every day, 7 days a week. So it depends on how busy you wish to be and how good you are to get those calls. But, I have a favorite drummer that I've worked on several thousand songs with. He's my age, incredible multi-platinum drummer. And when you start working with someone like that, it's very hard to go back to something else. And not having a shot at, and I did 63 steel guitar sessions while I was in Australia for that year. And I cannot tell you one drummer that I was excited about that I played with. And that's sad. It's the truth, though.
And from an educator's perspective, I know we had a discussion in our first phone call about the timing and how a lot of these drummers, to their standard, might seem like they play in time. But from your standard, where you're working with the next level, next caliber of musicians up, it's completely over the joint. And we just hinted at the fact that a little bit of it's environmental. But how do Australian musicians, and this is an international podcast, by the way, so people are listening all around the world, but maybe Australian musicians or people who are in more isolated areas where there isn't that population density or the big city, how do they go about building better timing and rising to the standard of these world-class players?
Well, I had the same problem in 2007 when I came here. I wanted to dive straight into it, and I surrounded myself with, the greatest steel guitar players, because I always felt like I was already there as a guitar player. But I wanted to get right at the edge of my seat as a steel guitar player. And I'd been playing for quite a lot of years, but compared to some of these guys, it's just I wasn't at that level at that time. And every answer came back the same. Every answer was seat time. That's it. It's seat time. And, there was a drummer that I worked with a lot in Australia back in the day. His name's Marty Smith. He had really good timing, pretty good timing. And but he locked himself in a shed and just played to a click and songs for a couple of years. I mean, it's all about getting into the gym, isn't it? If you want to be fit, get into the gym. And it's the same with practice. I mean, nearly every night, Michael, I come down here, pull my steel up against my console, put things on that are really difficult to play to and play to. I write charts out for some staff to sort of get my chart always reading and being on the ball. And that's the thing. I mean, I can pull out a couple of Nashville charts and show you. And in 2007, I got here, I thought they were playing football in the studio going, 4411, I'm like, what the hell's a 4411, I reverted that straight away to learning the harmonized scale at jazz school. And it kind of is, but it isn't. But it gave me a rudimentary understanding of what it was. So, if you're in the key of C and you've got a 2, you'd say
D minor?
D.
D.
Yeah, D minor if we're playing a harmonized scale. But in Nashville number system, the 2 is the 2. There's no minor. But that's what I thought.
Yeah. Well, can you give us a brief overview of the system? Because I've obviously heard of it, and I'm sure a lot of people have it.
Well, let me grab a chart and I'll show you. One second.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Got one on my desk.
So this is, for the listeners at home, Michael's just going off. He's sitting in his amazing studio with his amazing collection of guitars, and he's obviously going to give us a demonstration of this Nashville number system.
Where's how well you can see that. But
so we've got the song Me and You, 136 BPM, I'm guessing key of F, and we've got a couple of numbers up on the page.
Yeah, so basically the intro is 1, 3 minor, 4, 6 minor, 1, 3 minor, 4, a 1/3, 4 split bar, 1/3, 4 split bars. So so the number system is just an octave. So it's literally, if you're in the key of C, C to C, C, D, E, F, G, blah, blah, blah. So if you indicate a minor, you put a little minus sign after it. And the 1/3, if you were thinking like you were playing in G, for instance, straight, if you go to a kind of like an E minor, but you still you grabbed still the first and second string, that would be like a 1/3. So it's just indicating things just like you would write in normal chords, like C with a whatever B bass, whatever, you slash with the other note. So they're just doing it in numbers, opposed to how we would do it in musical notation. So I find now, for me, I can't work without something like this. It's so simple, and it's all on one page, and it makes my life very easy. There's no room for error. There's another reason why these Nashville guys are so fast is because they're all reading this chart. Say you've gone into the session, you've got a 6 or 7 piece band, and you've started this song in F, but you're finding it's too low. You want to go up to G, the same chart.
You just reorient yourself from the new key.
You just change the F to a G up here and you're away. Exactly the same chart, right? That's the beauty of it. If I'm working with somebody and, we need to remove that capo for the girl singer, I've already written a chart. The chart doesn't change. And it's even better if you're a guitar player like me. When I'm tracking acoustics, I don't know, whether you've had a lot of experience in this, but I do 2 or 3 parts. So I'm reading the same chart. So say, for instance, I was playing this song and I want to use the key of F and I don't want to use a capo. Well, I'll play that. But then I want to capo it. I can then think, okay, now I'm mentally thinking I'm in D, right? I'm just playing an F position, like I would. So I'd then capo up and I'm playing in the 5th position, right? So you can't, back in Australia in those days, I'd have to write a new chart just to do a capo position recording. But I do it fast, bang. I can just say, okay, give me another track, bang, straight down, move my capo, away I go.
Yeah, and as long as you know your fretboard and your intervals and your understanding of the music theory behind it, it's essentially just a mental capo for every song.
Yeah, well, then your brain gets even more fried if you then pull out a mandolin, and okay, I'm going to play a mandolin part. And then you just keep looking at the same chart. Sometimes you do go a little balmy, So.
But just as you said, like getting in amongst it, doing it every day for a month, like your brain just adjusts, just like, getting in the ring or getting in the gym, you just got to immerse yourself in it and rise to the standard.
I think the only thing that ever stops great progress is ourselves, is our own ability So I had a rude awakening a few years ago. My youngest son, the bass player one, said to me, "Dad, why don't you practice anymore?" And I was like, "Well, I play every day." He said, "But that's not practicing." And the penny dropped and I went, he's right. I'm playing over myself, you know? So that's what started probably 5 years ago, my practice routines.
Yeah, and it's an important thing. I think had a similar story when I was studying music. We had to pick a second study instrument, and so I wanted to play saxophone. So I thought that'd be cool. It's the closest thing to an electric guitar. I like saxophone. So silly old me went and enrolled in the brass class, not realizing it was a woodwind instrument. So I got assigned a trumpet. But the flip side of that is got to take lessons from one of the lead trumpet players in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, a guy named Bill. And he used to tell us, like, he's that good that he doesn't really practice. His gig is his practice. But then he goes, hang on, every year when auditions come around, I've got to try and beat the next up and coming 18 to 20, 25-year-old who does play and practice 9 hours a day. So in the month leading up to the re-audition things, he has to get his thing, and he goes, I should probably just get around to regularly practicing. But we can all become very complacent. And I think, unfortunately, for teachers, often we've got a guitar in our hand all day, or maybe you experience the same thing as a session player or a songwriter. You've got your guitar in your hand the whole day for work, and then you clock off work, and just still have that same mental kind of energy to pick it up and have fun or to have practice. So
that's the hardest thing. And I think obviously practice days are usually days where you haven't had it in your hand. I might like yesterday I did a steel session, but then I still practiced that night because it wasn't overly draining. But if you're drained, I think the other side of the practice routine is if you're overtired and you start playing and realize you're fumbling a little, get off, because muscle memory will remember mistakes. You can fall back into bad routines when you start learning something when you're not really agile.
That's some really, really good advice there. And muscle memory and the ability to develop that is one thing.
Steel guitar, you've got 4 limbs moving at once. You've got right hand technique, bar technique, tuning technique, volume pedal with your right leg, and your left leg foot is on pedals. Both your knees are engaging knee levers. So I have 5 knees and 4 pedals, 3 pedals on one guitar, 4 on another. So, they're all, lifting and lowering and raising strings. That's muscle memory as well, right? It's like a drummer. So I find it's not like me sitting there strumming away on an acoustic while I'm watching TV, which I could, which I do to keep my calluses, I just have a little one of them mini matins that they gave me. I just leave that in the living room,
It sounds more like you're describing how to fly a helicopter than play an instrument when you describe your knees and your hands and all those things. It sounds very complex.
Well, it really is. They say it's the most complex instrument in the world. So I've been reading, there's a book written by a really great steel player here in town, wrote a book on Buddy Emmons, which is, they say, the most amazing steel guitar player that's ever lived. And the stories in the book are fascinating. So the guy was obviously very paranoid about work, and he would go to the basement of his house, turn all the lights out, and play in the dark in case he lost his sight. Then he was like, well, what if I lose some fingers? So he started training himself using other ways of playing the guitar. That's how paranoid he must have been. But fascinating book, absolutely fascinating.
What was the name of that book? That sounds like a terrific read.
It's just called, I think it's called The Icon Buddy Emmons.
Yeah.
So Buddy, you might have seen Emmons guitars, Emmons steel guitars with the little Emmons V on them. He designed those. He did work for the Emmons company. It's his name. But he was the most celebrated steel guitar player. There's several of them, but he's probably the most celebrated. Then there's Lloyd Green. Then there's Paul Franklin. And the guy I was with today, Dan Dugmore, they're probably in the top 4 or 5 in the world,
Very fascinating. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
it's
sure
a
the
fascinating
listeners
instrument.
write
Yeah.
that one down. Check out the book.
Yeah, Buddy Emmons. Yeah, you'll love it. If I was upstairs, I could show you the book. But written by Steve Fizzle. Fischel, sorry, Steve Fischel. Yeah.
So we'll post the link to that one with the description of the podcast for those of you who are listening or watching along at home and not on a computer to Google. But Michael, I want to go back to something you said before, as you know, we often become the obstacles of our own success or something along the lines of that. For those people who might be in Australia or a country town or, you know, want to become a career musician and they're thinking and dreaming of moving to America or, you know, a big city where the music scene's a lot more happening than wherever they are, but they're nervous, their family's telling them not to do it. What advice do you have to those people about, you know, taking on their goals and creating their own life?
I think that, you know, you and I both know that YouTube is an amazing asset to learning. It's also an amazing asset to find out what's going on in different cities. I would say, let's say you're somewhere remote in Australia, and I'd say don't get hung up on how good you think you are. There's a guy that lives here. I don't know if you've come across him. His name's Jed Hughes, Australian.
The name does sound familiar.
Incredible guitar player. I would say world-class guitar player. Jed, I comes from somewhere rural Victoria, I think, maybe it was rural New South Wales, I don't know. But he left Australia. He became he studied very hard, but then he went to a university in Texas, and John McBride had discovered how good he was, got him into Nashville. He got a record deal. After so many weeks being here, he was lucky that they had put him on an audition for Patti Loveless, and he went out, had very little money, like $150 or something. You can see him do an interview on True